Illinois 6th Congressional District Candidate Forum. Before we do anything else, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I know, me too. We do that every time. Thank you. I do that every time.
Like many of you, I went to the March to the Polls in Chicago in January. And there was a chant there that went on, and it was, "This is what democracy looks like." And when I look around this room with 384 people and people in standing room only spaces, this is also what democracy looks like. I'm one of the co-presidents of the League of Women Voters of Glen Ellyn. Michelle Peterson, who's actually working back there, is my co-president. On behalf of Michelle and all the members, we just hit 151 members today, so all of our members, we want to thank you for being here and being part of the electoral process and getting to know the candidates a little bit better. Thank you, all of the candidates. It's amazing to have the 7 of you sitting here in the room, sharing your positions and answering our questions. There are cards and pencils. Submit your questions at any point. There's a table of league members who are synthesizing the questions and putting together the most common questions that we'll then present to the candidates to address. And with that, I would like to introduce to you Jan Dorner, who is a member of the League of Women Voters of Elmhurst, who will be our moderator tonight. Thank you so much.
My name is Jan Dorner, as was already presented, and I'm from the League of Women Voters of Elmhurst, and I'll be your moderator. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that neither supports nor opposes candidates or parties for any office. I would like to begin this forum by reviewing some of the ground rules for the candidate forum. These are printed on the back side of your program, but I just want to emphasize a few points before we get started today. Every candidate who is participating tonight has signed and returned the ground rules. These rules specify the format, time limits, and other rules related to the conduct of the forum. I'll be responsible for enforcing these rules. I may be old and feeble-looking, but I'm pretty tough. The candidates drew lots to determine the order in which they give their opening statements, and thereafter will alternate the order of answering the questions. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes for an opening statement, 1 minute to respond to each question, and 1 minute to make a closing statement. The closing statements will be in reverse order of opening statements. All responses will be timed. We ask the audience to write their questions on the index cards, which volunteers will collect for you. You've already heard that a panel of experienced members of the League of Women Voters will review the questions submitted by the audience and carefully select questions for appropriateness and to avoid duplication. We've asked the candidates, and we also ask the audience, to please keep all campaign materials outside the room. Okey-doke. Is this better? Yes. We're taking this forum, and it will be on the League of Women Voters of Glen Ellyn website at www.lwvge.org. We request that the audience refrain from taking photos or videos. It's distracting to the candidates and other members of the audience. We also believe that it's more conducive to a free exchange of ideas. I will hold it. Okay. Finally, we want to emphasize how grateful we are to these candidates who are not only willing to serve in office, but who agreed to come tonight. Please do not clap, cheer, boo, applaud, or otherwise vocalize your agreement or disagreement with any question or answer. Candidates, did you all see our timers over here? You see that stop sign? Okay, so let's start with opening statements, 2 minutes long, and we start with Becky Anderson Wilkins.
Well, I want to say thank you to the League of Women Voters of Glen Ellyn. What an incredible turnout. And if there is one bit of a silver lining in this horrible dark cloud we're living under, it's all of you and all of us up here. To be engaged and to get active and become critically think about who's running for offices, but critically think about the issues that face our country right now. So I think we owe all of you a round of applause. So it's incredible that you're here tonight. Many of you may know me from my family business. We're a 6th generation family book selling business, and I've been selling books for most of my life. When I started working in our family business when I was 11 years old. But it has been a joy in my life. And being in this building and Glenbard South High School, this is one of my favorite high schools in the area because one of my favorite school librarians is here is Diane Minkowski. And talk about someone who stands up for the First Amendment, stands up for diversity and what it means to have a variety of thought and to be able to talk about different ideas. And that's exactly what I stood up in my life, in my career, in my business. And I am very proud of my years of activism in my community for many, many years. But I'm really standing up for the big problems we're facing right now because I'm not going to stand by and watch this anymore. When we have Roscom and Ryan and Trump, they're moving our country in a totally backward direction. They're trying to take away our health care. They're trying to raise prices on prescription drugs. And they're giving the biggest tax cuts to the wealthiest and to large corporations in our country, but they're doing nothing for the middle class and those who are trying to reach the middle class. Washington is truly broken, but it's not broken for the wealthiest and those large corporations. And that's why I pledged in this campaign not to take a single penny from a lobbyist, because money is doing way too much talking in Washington. I've beaten so many things, but one of the things I'm very proud of is the way I've helped my community, the way I've fought for my community, the way I even beat breast cancer, and how I'm going to stand up for people who need help when it comes to health care. Thank you.
Our next opening statement is from Carole Cheney.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the League for hosting this wonderful event. I'm running to defeat Peter Roscom and to stop Donald Trump's dangerous agenda because I believe they are a threat to our values. They are also a threat to the American dream that everyone, not just those at the top, should have the opportunity to succeed. I grew up the daughter of a union butcher. My dad worked at the A&P. I grew up in the south suburbs. I've been working since I was 16 years old. My first job was at a Wendy's. At the time, it was a new food chain, so I'm dating myself. And I had to wear a button that said hot and juicy. So that says a little bit about how we have progressed. When I was in high school, my dad lost his job, and we had to move from our house to an apartment. And for the first time, I understood economic insecurity. But I was fortunate. I worked my way through college and got student loans, went to University of Illinois, got a master's degree, and ultimately I paid my way through Northwestern Law School, where I had the good fortune of being editor-in-chief of the Law Review. I became a partner at a major law firm while raising my kids and volunteering in the community. And then life happened. I had to have major surgery, and I was unable to work for a period of more than a year and a half. And during that time, I lost my life savings. And I understood what it means to be a paycheck away. And so I decided to stand up for others who, unlike me, because I was able and fortunate to go back to work, aren't so lucky. And I took a job as Illinois Chief of Staff to Congressman Bill Foster. And in that capacity, I did exactly what Peter Roscom does not do. I met with constituents, I held town halls, and I made the government work. I want to make the government work for you. I want this district to have a representative who is responsive to the people they represent.
Thank you. Jennifer Zordani is our next opening statement.
said, hold it down till the light comes on, and it'll take a long time.
Hello. The light is on. I am very good at following instructions. I'm Jennifer Zordani. So I'm running for the 6th District seat because most of you know who Peter Roskam is. And Peter Roskam does not work for you. Washington is broken, and Roskam has proven that he does not work for the people in this district. So last fall when I was knocking on a door and I said I'm a Democrat running for office, the man who answered had been sitting with his wife side by side watching TV. And the first thing he said to me is, will you protect my Social Security? Because he's in his 70s. He did everything right. He saved for retirement, he planned for that payment, and now he was feeling at risk because there was a talk of a government shutdown. So of course I'll protect your Social Security. You've paid into it. More recently, I met a young man who's working 3 jobs. He's going to North Central and he's working 3 jobs to try to limit his college debt. He's also paying into Social Security. Peter Roskam doesn't think about him. He doesn't think about the senior citizen, he doesn't think about the young man, and he doesn't think about anybody in between. So for every one of you who got on that train every day to go to your job, who sits on that clogged expressway, I know what you're working for. I think the laws for our country are supposed to work for you, and that's the reason I'm running. I've been an attorney for more than 20 years, and a financial services regulatory attorney. So I've lived through a lot of ups and downs in the industry, and I've seen how Republican politicians sit on their hands when work needs to be done. I'd be honored to have your vote and work for you and make the laws work for you every day.
Sean Casten will be our next opening statement.
Well, thank you. I'm Sean Casten. I think the animating feature of my career has been trying to focus on collaborative win-win solutions based on facts. And more than anything else, I'm running for Congress because somehow we've lost that spirit in Washington. I'm a biochemist and an entrepreneur by background. I started as a scientist doing research into advanced biofuels, then as an engineer working on developing clean energy technologies, and then for the last 16 years ran companies that had a mission to profitably reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We built about 80 projects, very proud of what we did, and basically we proved that if you're smart about it and you take a collaborative approach, there is no trade-off between your morals and your wallet. And that win-win is so important. You can cut CO2, you can create jobs, you can grow the economy, you can do all the things we want to do. I know it because I've done it. And I am so scared at how few people in Washington understand the opportunity, much less even the potential. And Peter Roskam and Donald Trump certainly don't. What we learned in the course of doing this is that there were way more opportunities to do what we did than we're limited by we weren't limited by technology, but we were limited by laws. And I can't change the laws of thermodynamics, but I'm hoping that I can change the laws of the land. And this sort of zero-sum approach that's become endemic goes way beyond climate change. So the ACA did improve healthcare outcomes and did lower costs. Peter Roskam voted to oppose it. You can design tax cuts that grow the economy and stimulate, and Roskam chose to burden the middle class with the costs of corporate cuts. We can have common sense gun regulations that make streets and churches safer, and Roskam instead has said that hollow point bullets have a sporting purpose. That's not a sport I want to play. But most of all, Congress is an awesome and really hard job. We need people who are collaborative, who are hard workers, who have moral compasses, who will meet with people and learn from them. And on that basis, I wouldn't hire Peter Roskam, so I hope you'll help me fire him.
Our next opening statement comes from candidate Amanda Howland.
Hi, I'm Amanda Howland. I've been a public servant all of my life, and the reason for that is that I grew up in a single-family household as a kid. My mom was a single mom. She had to fight for everything that we did, but I had grandparents who pushed me and said, you can be whatever you want to be. And in spite of all of the problems that we had growing up, I decided that I was going to help others, and I went into teaching emotionally disturbed and behavior disordered students as my first career. After that, I was encouraged by a building principal to get an administrative degree, and I became a school administrator in Bartlett, in the largest elementary school in the district, ran a multi-million-dollar budget, and worked with over 52 teachers and staff members. From there, I went to law school and was hired right out of law school by a federal district judge to clerk in his court. And I've been working in constitutional law and civil rights law and federal law ever since. I'm also a trustee at the College of Lake County. I'm in my second 6-year term, elected countywide with the highest vote total both times, and was board chairman there 2 years of my first term. Last year, I was elected to the National Diversity and Equity Council for Community College Trustees, and I serve on that board, and I help legislate in Washington. I'm also on the U.S. Global Initiative Consortium Board, which fights for diplomacy and our military budgets in terms of looking at expanding our State Department and getting us back as a leader in the world. I know what it's like to be poor, I know what it's like to be middle class, and I know what it's like to have a representative that does not work for you. And I'm running for this seat for a second time because I scared him the first time, and this time he knows we're going to take him out. So I hope I can earn your vote. There's a lot more about me on my website that I can't possibly tell you in just 2 minutes, but I trust all of you to make good decisions. We've got a lot of good candidates up here, and we need to send somebody to DC who can stand up and fight.
Our next candidate is Ryan Huffman to give his opening statement.
Well, thanks so much, everyone, for coming out tonight. My name is Ryan Huffman. I'm 31 years old. I'm a data analyst, and I live in Palatine. My background is in policy analysis. I spent some time in D.C., interned at the White House under President Obama, worked on Capitol Hill for a little bit, and also worked for the Department of Energy, analyzing the electric vehicle market. So I know the federal government, I know how it works, and more importantly, I know how and why it doesn't work. But I think this race is less about what we've done and more about what we're going to do. And I think it's also critical that we run as Democrats not just against Trump or against Peter Roskam, but that we stand for something, that we give people a reason to get off their couches and come to the polls and vote for us. So what I stand for is expanding health coverage to every single American in a single-payer model. I stand for raising the minimum wage to a living wage so that nobody who works 40 hours a week has to worry about whether they can feed their family. I stand for banning assault weapons. I stand for putting a tax on carbon emissions. And more than anything, what I stand for is getting money out of politics, because that, to me, is the entire ballgame. That's the reason why we have common sense gun legislation that has 80, 90% public support and can't even get to the floor for a vote. It's the reason why our representatives literally run away from their constituents. Peter Roskam's made a pattern of this. There's another video that came out this week. And it's because in our system now, they have made the value through voter suppression and gerrymandering, they've made the value of the individual vote, the individual influence in our democracy at an all-time low, and the influence of corporate money and wealthy donors is at an all-time high. That means that Peter Roskam actually has no incentive to care about what his constituents think of it. That's the problem. So we can beat Peter Roskam now, but unless we go and change that system, we're going to have, in 2 years, Peter Roskam back again or somebody just like him. The system has to change, and that's what I want to go to Washington to fight for.
And our next candidate is Kelly Mazeski.
So nice to have the introduction. Thank you all for being here. It's just amazing seeing people standing up there and back to listen to this too. I'm Kelly Mazeski, and I'm running for Congress because I believe that we deserve a representative who will actually represent us. And Peter Roskam has shown us over and over again how little interest he has in the people in this district. And I want to change that. I am a breast cancer survivor, and 3 years ago, when I was going through chemo, our insurance company of 20 years informed me they weren't going to cover us the following year. This was alarming, to say the least. But I made phone calls, did some research, and I was very happy and relieved to say that the Affordable Care Act came through for me and my family, and I was able to keep my doctors. Peter Roskam and Donald Trump want us to believe that repealing the Affordable Care Act and gutting Medicaid is in our best interest, and I bet you all of us in this room agree that that simply is not true. I am a scientist, and because I'm a scientist, I understand the harsh reality of climate change. It is the greatest challenge facing our generation. I'm a longtime activist, a grassroots activist for the environment, and a longtime Sierra Club member. I was elected in 2014 because of this to the Illinois Environmental Council. Peter Roskam and Donald Trump have put politics over facts when it comes to climate change. They are not only jeopardizing the health of our planet, but the health of our children as well, in order to prop up failing fossil fuel industries just to make their supporters happy, and that's got to end. So I am running because I want to stand up to Trump on healthcare, on the environment, and for the hardworking families in this district. And I've been fortunate to earn the endorsements of Emily's List, the Chicago Sun-Times, Congresswomen Jan Schakowsky and Sherry Bustos, and other numerous environmental leaders and other groups, because they believe, and I believe, that I am the best candidate to beat Roscoe next November. And I hope you do too, and I hope that I can earn your vote.
Thank you. Our first question goes to Carole Cheney. What measures do you support to improve and secure elections and voting in our country?
Well, you know, the issue of governmental reforms is a multifaceted one. We need to be working against voter suppression efforts throughout our country, but we also need to be looking at the internet and what has been done in the way of the hacking. Illinois actually was one of the states that was hacked into by the Russians, and fortunately they didn't do anything to the system here, but this is not something that we can treat lightly as Donald Trump has been doing, and it is not something that we can ignore. It is vital to our system of democracy that we address that issue. To me, that is the #1 issue right now, and it's very serious for our country. When we look overall at issues of voting rights, I think not only suppression, but the issue of gerrymandering needs to be addressed. Right now, there is a fair districting commission that is looking at this issue because that impacts voter rights as well.
Thank you. Jennifer Zordani.
So I agree that we need fair maps across the United States and within states. I find it very frustrating that I can go and talk to a voter and literally on the same block that their neighbor is in a different district. It's very hard for people to communicate about what the needs are for their community and who is representing them and what's getting done with the way we have unfair maps. So fair maps is a starting point. I would restore the Voting Rights Act protections within a lot of states. There is an incredible amount of voter suppression going on. We are fortunate in Illinois that we have a pretty good record, but it could always be better, and we're seeing in some areas that voting booths are being trimmed down, so it's going to be harder for people to vote. There's a lot that needs to be done in terms of people themselves being aware of what's happening in social media.
Thank you. Sean Casten.
So the two trends that should scare us all in this room is that for the last 15, 20 years, all of the trends in demographics have been on the side of the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party has basically fallen asleep on it. And all of the trends in turnout have been on the side of the Republican Party, and they've been very nervous and active. And so these efforts at voter suppression, whether it's pulling back the Voter Rights Act, whether it's seeing what's happened in the gerrymandering in the states, even the Russian electoral hacking, you can understand why the Republican Party has been so silent, because they depend on disenfranchisement of the vote. I'd ask you all, what we can do about that between now and 2018 is vote. The NSA said today that Trump has not yet asked them to investigate the 2018 election. All of us up here on this stage are nervous about that. Going forward, yes, we need a modern Voter Rights Act. We need to make sure that we get money out of politics. We need a full investigation of what happened to the Russians, but none of that happens if we don't get Democrats in control.
Amanda Howland.
First of all, we do need a Voter Rights Act, but we also need to reinstate a paper ballot system. I was an election protection attorney in Toledo, Ohio during the John Kerry, John Edwards campaign. And I saw how easily even then it was to hack our voting machines. And that hasn't changed, it's gotten worse. So if we don't have a paper backup everywhere to make sure that you actually got your vote to count considering what you voted for, we've got a problem. I also think we need to continue and expand same-day registration. We need to get rid of the gerrymandering as much as we possibly can, and I know a lot of that has to come at the state level, not the federal level, but that disenfranchises voters, We also could possibly look at other countries who make your election day a day off from work so that people can actually get to the polls instead of having to rush out during their lunch hour or their dinner hour when they're paid on an hourly basis. And they can actually get out there and vote because it is our obligation to vote.
Thank you. Ryan Huffman, what are your measures to support? What measures do you support to improve and secure elections and voting in our country?
Well, first off, I want to second what Amanda said, and I've heard this from a lot of groups around the area. Take a paper ballot. In most of the polling places around you, you have the choice, and you have a right to have a paper ballot. So do that for now. As long as our federal government is not going to take the threat of election machine hacking seriously, we've got to take our own precautions. So that's a good way to go about it. Our ideal of one person, one vote is one of the most important things in our democracy. And it's something that has been under attack for many decades from the Republican Party, through gerrymandering, through voter suppression, so we have to fight back against those. I propose a full nonpartisan drawing of the maps across the country. Hopefully we'll get a good Supreme Court decision coming up to help us with that. We also got to get rid of the Electoral College. I'm sorry, but it's just not working for us because there are people in rural states, their votes just count for more than ours do. And then we also need to make Election Day a national holiday. I think that's a no-brainer. We have to do whatever we can to lower the cost of voting because that's what's filtering out the people who tend to be lower income.
Kelly Mazeski?
We have to have clear consequences for countries that are interfering with our elections. We know Russia interfered with the last election, and we have not made them have any consequences on this. And this is very frustrating to me. The Republicans and the Democrats passed legislation to put sanctions on Russia, on countries that buy weapons from Russia. And guess what? President Trump would not sign it. This is not an administration that is standing up to this. So going forward, we have to draw the line in the sand and show you cannot mess with our democracy. We also need to make it easier to register to vote. Right now, voter suppression unfairly affects the elderly, minorities, and students. So we have to expand registration, and we have to end gerrymandering and prevent our politicians from choosing their voters and allow the voters to elect the representatives.
Thank you. Becky Anderson Wilkins.
You know, one of the greatest rights in this country as a democracy and as an American is our right to vote. And no one should be prevented from voting for any good reason because it definitely is one of the greatest rights that we can express ourselves. And that's why these elections in a primary and, of course, in November are so important. You know, in Illinois, you get a driver's license, you can register to vote. It is so great that we do that here in this state. But we do have problems. Social media, what they're doing with Facebook and what they're trying to prevent. I think the owner of Facebook really feels like he's a lot of regrets for what happened by selling so many ads on Facebook that influenced so many people unnecessarily and not knowing really what was going on. But when you think even in Naperville, we have 3 congressional representatives for our city. So many towns and cities have multiple representatives, and we're split from one side of the street to the next. You know, you could have a different congressman just because you live across the street from your neighbor. It doesn't make any sense. And also to fix the Voting Rights Act, we need to make sure that that is restored to its fullest. But if you think back in 2000, if we had those paper chads, remember the chads? If we had Al Gore, it would be a much different company.
Thank you.
Right now.
Jennifer Zordani, what specific key initiatives for federal gun control legislation will you seek?
So, for every single one of you that worries about your kid going into school, a movie theater, when you go into church, everywhere you go nowadays, you're nervous. I think we need to stop gun trafficking, which means enforcing the laws that we have and preventing straw purchasers, implementing universal background checks. We need an assault weapons ban that includes banning high-capacity magazine extenders. We need to oppose laws that lower our standards. So the national concealed carry that would lower the standards state to state. Illinois has good standards. Missouri has none. We don't want someone from Missouri coming over here. We also cannot arm our teachers. That is wrong. Education in America needs support, and I am absolutely opposed to this administration's NRA-bought agenda.
Thank you. Sean Casten?
So I want to start with mass shooters because that's what's in the news, but it's certainly not all of it. There are only 5 things that statistically correlate with being a mass shooter. White, male, 14 to 45 years old, history of domestic violence, and access to a gun. If we are focused on anything else, we are wasting our time. We can't do anything about the first 3 of those. But the first thing is, my goodness, let's pass laws that make sure that anybody who is convicted of domestic violence or under a restraining order for domestic violence cannot have a gun. Number 2, we have too many guns out there. And the problem with that, and I think we're all probably in agreement on this, is that the pervasive influence of money in politics prevents good laws from getting to the floor. The domestic violence laws, the no fly, no buy, the background checks, all the things are stopped from getting to the floor by money in politics. We need to fix Citizens United to get that done. The third thing is, I would like to see us regulate guns in the same way we regulate cars. And if responsible gun owners want to have a gun, fine. You need a license, registration, and insurance, and if somebody uses your gun in a crime, you are liable, in the same way you are with your car.
Thank you. Amanda Howland?
First of all, there is a law in effect for domestic violence. It was passed in 1996 that prohibits anybody who's been convicted of misdemeanor or any further charges of domestic violence from purchasing a gun. What we need to do is we need to close the loopholes, number 1. We need to reinstate the assault weapon ban. We also need to have universal background checks. We need to make sure gun owners are licensed. It certainly would be helpful if we made sure that gun salespeople were licensed, and also that gun owners had the training that they need to know how to handle a handgun. I would also point out that in terms of gun deaths, the largest number of deaths in this country come from using a gun for suicide. The mass shootings are the ones we hear about all the time, but we really need to start working on our mental health issues in this country to make sure that we're keeping guns out of the hands of people who have serious mental health issues.
Ryan Huffman?
Well, I mentioned this right in my opening statement. I'm fully in favor of reinstating the assault weapons ban. That's a good place to start. We've got to ban bump stocks. We've got to ban high-capacity magazines. We've got to ban silencers. Basically anything that makes an already dangerous weapon more dangerous. These guns are made for the military. They're not made to be on our streets. And so we have got to have these kinds of common sense gun reforms. Yes, we have to have stronger universal background checks. Close the loopholes. We've got to make sure that if you're on the terror watch list, you can't get a gun. I mean, some of these things are so basic, they're no-brainers, but we have to get them done. And again, it's about the NRA, it's about their influence over our politicians, so we've got to get their money out of politics, and that's the only way we're actually going to finally get some of these really important reforms.
You stole my line on the Dickey number. Listen, I want to tell you that 92% of Americans support having universal background checks. And guess what? 87% of Republicans support this. So we need to support universal background checks for sales done at gun shows, between family and friends, and online purchases. And we need to repeal the Dickey Amendment so that we can invest money in research on gun violence in this country. The Republicans passed the Dickey Amendment in 1996 to prevent funding for gun violence. That's got to stop. I also support a federal ban on assault and semi-assault weapons and selling bump stocks and high-capacity magazines. And I'm glad to see that some companies, corporations are standing up on this. But we also have to elect more Democrats. And because the Republicans are stopping legislation from getting passed, we have to appeal to our Republican friends to tell their elected officials that they will not vote for them if they take 1 cent from the NRA, because we're all on board on this.
Thank you. Becky Anderson-Wilkins?
In 2016, President Obama had a lot of executive orders to deal with this health issue across our country. And a lot of us have to deal with all the things that were spoken here. And I'm going to agree with ditto, 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 6. I think that was 6 dittos with everything that's been said. But you know what happened to all those executive orders? Pretty much they've all been erased because President Trump hasn't honored any of them. But in that same month, January of 2016, as a Naperville City Councilwoman, I stood up to the NRA and I suggested we have a gun turn-in program in the city of Naperville, because if we don't think that these type of mass shootings or things like this can happen in our communities, they can. And when you think 8 children a day are killed with guns, and 42 are injured on average every day in this country, 24 mass shootings already in this country, and yay for Dick's Sporting Goods to announce today that they are not going to have for sale assault weapons, and it's 21 to buy a gun in their stores. So if we have all retailers do this, we're going to make a difference in this country.
And Carole, Cheney. We need to treat the issue of gun violence like the public health epidemic that it is. Robin Kelly, actually, who's endorsed me in this race, is a leading advocate for gun violence prevention, and she has introduced legislation this session to repeal the Dickey Amendment that was recently referred to so that we can study this issue. And actually, the sponsor of that initial amendment regrets having done so. Every time there is a tragedy in this country, we talk about what could have been done to prevent that tragedy, and it's like plugging holes in a dike. And unless we address this issue comprehensively, we won't make real change. Yes, I agree with everything we've talked about here, but we need to engage in a comprehensive plan in this country. And I find it so fascinating that after the Parkland tragedy, the students became the adults in this dialogue. But what is coming out of it is that people are standing up with their pocketbooks, and that is making a difference as well.
Thank you. Sean Casten, what specific steps do you support to ensure health care access for all?
So what we have to do for healthcare is deliver the best possible healthcare at the lowest possible cost. What we have to do in the short term is defend the ACA from attacks and protect it, because it made a huge improvement on that. On a going forward basis, I would like to see us put in a true universal health care, which means basically making sure that the people at the bottom of the spectrum who don't have money or don't have income to cover health care have true universal health care, not just when they go to the emergency room, but coverage there. I really like Chris Murphy's idea of allowing people to elect to buy into that plan, an optional opt-in to Medicare, and if everybody wants to buy in, that's great. As an employer, we had the ACA exchanges in about 4 of the states we worked in, and the markets are so inefficient because they're so scattered, so I'd like to see the exchanges so that there's a standard menu available to everybody in every state, and give people the option to flex up, and if there's a commercial plan you like, that's fine. If you prefer the Medicare for all, that's fine. But I think give people an option to choose everything and don't dictate what the right model is for them.
Thank you. Amanda Howland?
Well, as also being a cancer survivor, I lost a kidney right after the last election. Universal health care is incredibly important to me. My uncle, Dr. Quentin Young, who used to be on NPR, fought tirelessly for universal health care all of his life. He studied it all over the world. He studied what works and what doesn't work. Right now, we spend so much money on administrative costs with our insurance companies that it's absolutely ridiculous. If we got that money out of the insurance companies and put it into health care so that we had universal health care, we'd be saving several $1 trillion that we could put back into our health care system. We also need to be able to negotiate drug prices. Our VA can do that. Why are the drug companies charging us 3 times the amount of what it costs to get the same drug in Canada or in France or in Great Britain? We need to move ahead with our healthcare system and make sure that healthcare is a right, not a privilege, and that we have universal healthcare for everybody.
Thank you. Ryan Huffman?
Well, this is one of the actual few issues that we tend to disagree on among us up here. Amanda and I are both very loud and proud in favor of single-payer healthcare. I think that's the way that we have to go as a country. It's what we see happening in industrialized nations all over the world, and they have everyone covered. They do it for less cost, and they actually have better health outcomes by a margin than we do. So to me, it's something we have to go to. I know it's complicated. I know it's going to take some time to make that transition. But as long as we really do believe, as we all say, that healthcare is a right and not a privilege, then there can't be any income threshold you have to clear in order to have the privilege of getting healthcare. It's got to be a right. So there's a lot of support for plans where you have to buy into a public option or buy into Medicare. You're still buying into it, and not everybody can do that. And I know Medicaid will cover a lot of that, but there's going to be gaps. We've got to make sure that everyone has health care in this country, and we'll all be much happier when we do, and especially when we move into a single-payer system.
Kelly Mazeski.
I too support a Medicare for all public option. This would be a plan where anybody can buy into at any age that would have the same providers as Medicare. And this would compete with the private insurance plans on the exchange offered by insurance companies. We can save, according to the CBO, we could save $158 billion with a public option over the next 10 years. We also pay twice the cost of care per person per year than the next 3 highest ranked countries in the world. That's just not acceptable. So I believe that if we can use the bargaining power of Medicare, a government program, we can reduce not only the cost of insurance premiums, but the cost of care itself. And we all have had sticker shock when we've gone to the pharmacy. I know our family certainly has, and that needs to end. So we need to be able to negotiate prescription drug prices. This is a personal issue for me and my family, and it's personal for everyone in this room. And I am truly committed to reducing the cost of care, improving quality, and make sure everyone can get insurance.
Thank you. Becky Anderson Wilkins.
It's not that I truly believe that universal health care is the way we have to go. And what we have to do, though, is make sure we fix the ACA. We do those first best steps to get to that point, and that is a public option buy-in to Medicare. Medicare has a 3%, a very, very low administrative cost. When you think about that, that means that the money that you're paying into the system and for that option, it's going directly to your care. It's not going to CEOs, it's not going to shareholders, and that's the problem with the system right now. But we need to help families, we need to help women, and we need to help women in family planning. But we have to make sure that we fix the ACA first, and getting to that goal of universal health care or a single payer plan is definitely the goal. That is what we have to aspire to. But I think by doing that, we can really make sure that it is a right, and that we make sure that people really have that. I grew up in a family pharmacy that started in 1875. I worked behind the counter, and when I would bring up people behind the counter, this is even years ago, you could see the sticker shock on the faces of especially seniors having to afford their care. When you buy a cancer drug in the United States, it costs $1,200. Why does it cost $300 there?
Carole Cheney.
I'm in the ACA myself, so I see the benefits of the program, and I see the challenges as well because of the costs and because of the uncertainty of whether your particular doctor is within the system or not. So there are challenges, but our first step needs to be protecting the ACA from the sabotage that Republicans are trying to foist upon it. If you look at the tax plan that was passed in December, it got rid of the individual mandate. That was a direct attack on the ACA because it's going to decrease the risk pool, which means premiums are going to increase. I do think that we need to look ultimately toward achieving a rational approach to universal health care, but it has to be taken in steps. As the Chicago Tribune recognized in endorsing me, that's my approach to issues, is looking at them logically and how we can get from point A to point B strategically and rationally.
Thank you. Jennifer Zordani.
I also am a strong advocate for saving and fixing the Affordable Care Act. Bringing the millions of people onto health care, we all agree health care is a right. But there remains issues, and we have to start looking at the rankings and what's going on with that system. I've also advocated for bringing Medicare down to 55 as a start, because we know that when people are losing their jobs at that age, they typically get new jobs with less benefits and less coverage, help us adjust some of the rankings in the Affordable Care Act. Bringing down the cost of prescription drugs by letting the U.S. government negotiate those prices, and fixing the Veterans Administration. The Veterans Administration is our single largest single payer system, and it isn't working so that our veterans get access to all the services they need. I want you to pay attention as Peter Roskam has assumed the chair of the Health Subcommittee and how he's learning so much about health care.
Howland, what are your plans to conduct a vigorous campaign to defeat your opponent in the general election? What will you do to appeal to independents and Republicans?
Well, I've worked tirelessly in all of the capacities so far in my elected positions to appeal to all sides of the aisle, whether it's independent, Democratic, or Republican. My college board at College of Lake County is a fairly Republican board. I'm a minority. I've been able to work with them, and as board chairman was able to get them to come together and look at the long-term benefits of spending some money up front to put in a geothermal field and to do a lot of other energy efficient things at the college that the older trustees who've been there for quite a while were fairly resistant to do. But in the long run, it's going to serve us and save us a lot of money. I also mediate most of the time in my law practice. I do not like being a contentious litigator. I believe it's much more important to sit people down and find out what do we have in common, what can we work on, and where can we go so that we can find common ground. And that's something that I do in my everyday life, not only as an attorney, but as a trustee, and in everything else that I do on a daily basis.
Thank you. Ryan Huffman?
Well, I think we know that this district is a swing district now, right? So that makes us think that maybe our Republican friends have moved to the center. That's not what I see happening. What I see happening is that the progressives in this district, there's more of them than they used to be, and they're more fired up than they used to be. So I think it's tempting to say, let's move as far as we can to the center, so maybe the Republicans don't quite notice that we're actually Democrats, and that's all they're going to vote for us. I just don't think that's a winning strategy. As I said before, it's about, we've got to explain that what we stand for. Because I think that we win on policy when we explain what we fight for, when we say that we are the party that believes that the government can be a force for good in people's lives, that if communities are being torn apart by gun violence, one party thinks that the government has a responsibility to do something about that, and the other party doesn't. And I think you can appeal to independents and Republicans by just loudly and proudly making the case for what you believe in, that you genuinely want to help them in their lives. That's how I think we'll finally flip the seat blue.
Kelly Mazeski.
When I decided to run a year ago, actually this February, I knew because I had worked for a congresswoman and because I had worked on the Obama campaign for 2 years that to go against an 11-year incumbent like Peter Roskam was going to take a top-notch team. So one of the first things I did was get some of the best people to help me to go the distance against Roskam, and I have a very strong infrastructure for that, and that is critical, and that's something that's not talked about enough. If I'm elected to win the primary, we are ready to go the next day. I also think that as a candidate, I provide the greatest contrast to Roskam. As somebody who's walked through the healthcare walk and bought insurance on the ACA, who's a scientist who has years of experience, 18 years of experience in local government, who's a longtime environmental activist, I provide that contrast. And I will, and my team and our grassroots supporters, which is very strong, will attack him on this tax bill, on the environment, on healthcare. He has voted against these things repeatedly. Thank you. The latter.
Becky Anderson Wilkins.
Well, as a Naperville City Council member, and I've been on there for 3 years as the only elected legislator running for this race, you know, we run as a nonpartisan body, but you know where people stand politically, but you are there to serve the people of your community to get things done, and we have gotten a lot of things done. Actually, we've been probably one of the least contentious city councils in a long time, because the first time we have 4 women on there, which makes a difference. Absolutely makes a difference. But we fought for many things that we agreed on, or a majority has voted for, whether it's fair housing, or making cigarettes 21 in our city, or standing up for transparency and openness. So many things that we have accomplished that our previous councils did not accomplish. But one of the things that we can't have is a representative who likes to run away. So we have a runaway Roskam. You have to stand up and you have to talk to everybody. And that's what I've done in my business, standing up for the First Amendment. And that's standing up for ideas that maybe you don't agree with, but you need to talk to somebody. And that's what I've done my whole career as an activist in my community, and since I started working in my business as 11 years old.
Carole Cheney.
I can go toe-to-toe and head-to-head with Peter Roskam because I've done exactly what he didn't do. I served constituents as Illinois Chief of Staff to Congressman Bill Foster, and I made the government work for them. I held the town halls on issues ranging from the ACA to LGBTQ rights, and when Peter Roskam says they're too tough to hold, I can tell him otherwise because I've done it. I've gotten people IRS tax refunds to the tune of $90,000, and I've helped veterans get their disability benefits. But I can also go toe-to-toe with Peter Roskam because he is a savvy trial attorney. I've been an attorney. He won his oral advocacy when he was in law school. When I was at Northwestern, I won the oral advocacy. He is a savvy politician who comes across in the media as though he is a rational moderate when his voting record shows that he is an extreme conservative. I can call him out. I have media experience. I used to be a reporter and a news director with a national public radio station. This is a race that is going to get national media attention, and we need someone who is articulate and understands the issues and can call Peter Roskam out on it.
Jennifer Zordani.
So, if there's one thing that people are thinking about right now, it's not small government, because we know that on the Republican side, they've blown up the budget, they've increased the national debt, they're willing to spend without accountability, while they torpedo projects that help people. So people want better government. We just talked about healthcare. We know that Medicare offers a lot of great solutions, but it has high costs, and there are issues within Medicare that nobody's talking about. We know that comprehensive immigration reform is supported within our district by people on both sides of the aisle, businesses and individuals. Peter Roskam didn't stand up for that. He doesn't stand up for gun reform. We will maintain our positions as Democrats, and voters will divorce their party and come over and join us. And that will defeat Peter Roskam.
Sean Casten.
I want to come back because I think the question was about how we attract the Republicans and independents. And politics is such a weird thing. Like, where else in your life do you have to pick a team? I always liked the Jon Stewart line when he said, are you a Republican or a Democrat? And he said, you know, graphs have y-axes also. I don't have, you know, in a normal life, you don't pick a team. I've done financing raisings, I've done, you know, basic research, I've done engineering projects. I have no idea the politics of a lot of people I work with. It didn't matter, you just get things done, right? And I would disagree with Ryan that there's a real strong Democratic progressive surge here. The people in this district are basically lowercase d Democratic. We believe in social and liberal things. We're not really big into the government or bedrooms and bathrooms. We're wealthier than average, more educated than average. It used to be a hard choice if that was your decision which party to pick, but the Republican Party has moved so far over, and as a friend said to me the other day, he said, you know, you're the only person who's going to appeal to phantom Republicans who the Democratic Party is ignoring.
Thank you. Brian Huffman, you're starting this question. I believe climate change is the most urgent issue we face as a society. Given the current absence of federal leadership on this issue, what will you do if elected to act on climate and take advantage of opportunities to move to clean energy?
Thanks. That sounds like a question I could have written myself. I also agree that climate change is the most pressing issue that we face. It's an existential threat to our species, to our planet, and it's alarming to me that we aren't taking it seriously. I've been fighting this fight for a long time. My background's in energy policy. When I was at the White House, I was at the Council on Environmental Quality trying to whip votes for a cap-and-trade bill during Obama's first term. We didn't get it done, and we really haven't gotten much else done. And so now we're in this period where we're just trying to set targets for people, and we're going to throw money at renewable energy, and that's going to do it. It's not going to be enough. I'm in favor of those things. We got to set targets. We got to throw money at renewable energy. But unless we actually put a price on carbon pollution, there's no way that we're going to be able to reduce the carbon emissions enough to avoid the worst, most disastrous effects of climate change. So I like a national cap and trade system. I'm also in favor of a carbon tax and fee or carbon fee and dividend system. Either of these are good ways to make sure that we are actually putting a hard cap on how much carbon is emitted.
Kelly Mazeski.
Well, I have spent most of my adult life working to protect the environment and working on renewable energy and climate change, and that's why I was elected to the Illinois Environmental Council. I think we have to move towards a renewable energy economy. China, India, Europe, lots of other countries are spending hundreds of billions of dollars on renewable energy. Instead, we want to go back to fossil fuel with this administration, and that's got to change. wind and solar. This is a win-win situation for our country. Not only can we invest in renewable energy to combat climate change, but we can create thousands of good-paying middle-class jobs. Wind and solar are the fastest growing segments of the economy, growing 12 times faster than the rest. Wind turbine technician is the fastest growing job in this country. I'm on the Illinois Environmental Council. We passed a bill called the Future Energy Jobs Act here in Illinois, which is a template that should be used by the rest of the country that provides funding to train people in high-tech energy manufacturing. It should be a template for the country. Thank you.
Becky Anderson Wilkins.
My daughter is an environmentalist, and she was working on the Chesapeake Bay, getting all the constituencies around the bay to work on climate change and ocean rise. Well, guess what happened to her position? Mr. Pruitt. One word. You know, and now she's working for a think tank in Washington, D.C. to work on environmental issues. It's terrible that we have this situation where our Clean Water Act, our Clean Air Act are being dismantled by the EPA, or what we call the EPA. But when we think about the 6th Congressional District, many of our communities are in the watershed of Lake Michigan. That means we are getting our fresh water from Lake Michigan. Many of our wells are contaminated, many in the state of Illinois. We know what happened in Flint, Michigan, and a lot of other things, but we have to protect our water. And we are one of the largest sources of fresh water in the world, but yet they're trying to take some of the protections away from that greatest source of fresh water.
Carole Cheney.
There are two issues here. There's the issue of climate change, and then there's the issue of environmental protection in other ways, and both of them are under attack with the current administration. The budget blueprint that Donald Trump set forth, and to me a budget blueprint like a tax plan is really the moral values that you have for your society, was a 30% cut to the EPA. I think the number one step we should take is fire Scott Pruitt. But what's so sad right now is the focus on the fossil fuels, and we do need to incentivize the use, to de-incentivize, I should say, because really if you look at the fossil fuel industry and you look at the lobbying, this is where the role of money plays such a significant part. And if you look at Peter Roskam's record and who he is receiving money for, and then you look at his voting record on environmental issues, he has an 8% voting record favorable from the League of Conservation Voters because he is continually voting with the fossil fuel industry.
Thank
we
you.
need advocates of, thank you.
Jennifer Zordani.
During this administration, we know that the EPA was put up for sale with Pruitt coming in. And we see this president's policies favor the fossil fuel industry. He's an outlier. There's no disagreement that climate change is caused by human activity, our carbon footprint. We had taken significant steps to start reducing our carbon footprint, reduce global warming here at home. Other countries are now taking those steps as part of the Paris Accord, but also because they were behind in doing that. China is spending a ton of money now because they didn't. Their water is toxic, their land is toxic, they can't grow food for their people. Here in America, we know our environmental laws were well worth the cost. And people support that, again, on both sides of the aisle. So, when we get rid of this president and vote Democratic, we will have better environmental laws and move forward again.
Sean Casten.
This is almost the only thing I've done for 20 years. The win-win opportunity is so huge and so underappreciated. The only way to release CO2 into the atmosphere is to burn fossil fuel, and nobody is giving away fossil fuel for free. Everything you do to increase the efficiency, the energy efficiency of the economy, lower CO2 emissions, creates jobs, grows the economy. We estimated that the technologies we were developing, if fully deployed in every site we could identify, would reduce US CO2 emissions by 20%. That is a huge number. The barriers were existing laws. Yes, we need full carbon regulation, but the existing laws, there's so much innate tension in environmental policy that's been, the environmental community has demonized the right has demonized the environmental community, and there is tons of opportunities to clean this up. I had a friend at EPA in the Bush administration when I was advocating on the Hill. I said, why can't we change these things? He said, oh, we know we can change them. We just never trusted that there was someone in Congress we'd trust to carry the water through and get it done.
Thank you.
There's more than a minute in that answer.
Amanda Howland.
First thing that I would do as far as climate change is concerned is I would get us back in the Paris Agreement. I do know that most of our states and many of our companies are still adhering to the requirements that the Paris Agreement set forth. But we need to be an active part of that, and we need to be a leader. The second thing that I would really actively pursue is the carbon fee and dividend, because the cap and trade wasn't doing enough. And with the carbon fee and dividend, for every dollar that you bring back from the carbon fee, it comes right back into our economy. We need to make sure that we encourage the use of alternative energy. If we're going to give businesses tax advantages to be in our states or our area, why not give them tax advantages for doing business in a green economy situation? At the College of Lake County, one of the things we've also pushed is making sure that we're training students for jobs that are going to be in photonics, robotics, electronics, geothermal, because those are the jobs of the future, and those are jobs that are going to bring money back into the economy.
Thank you. Kelly Mazeski, we've all had failures as well as success stories. Is there a failure in your past that has played a positive role in shaping who you are today? Well, I was taught when I go into interviews to never say I've had a failure. My failure is that I care too much. You know, I can sit here and say that nothing truly stands out as a failure in my life. I don't mean that arrogantly. I don't have any regrets. I do care a lot. I'm a passionate person. That's one of the reasons I'm running for office today. I've cared a lot about my own community, and that's how I ironically ended up here running for office. It was never an aspiration, but the fate led me to this path. And so I do care deeply about what I stand for on the environment, on healthcare, and doing the best job I can to represent the people in this room and in this district, and being a good communicator. And I wish I had something more exciting to say about a failure, but I don't. Thank you. Becky Anderson Wilkins.
I'm going to say the biggest failure on my part is that I was probably the shyest girl in the room. I would have literally wanted to stay in the wall. And I was so shy that if I had to talk in front of a group of people, I would sweat profusely and feel like I was going to throw up all the time. And it took me years to get out of that. And what got me out of it was my family business, because my brothers weren't going to get out there and be the voice for our business. So I guess I was elected to be the one. And it was that got me out of it. It's just talking passionately about your community and serving your community, engaging your community, but also with books. I'm a nerd, I'm a big reader, and I am so proud of that, and I love to read, and it's that passion of what reading brings to you, the empathy, all the things that you can learn from a book, but also the people that you can connect with, and that's what really did it for me. I still have some anxiety sometimes when it comes to being in big groups, but you guys are great. But that is really what I wish I would have gotten over it a lot sooner in my life.
Thank you. Carole Cheney.
I've had various failures along the way in my life, as all of us have, but I guess I look at those as part of what has made me who I am today. And I'll give you an example. One of those times was when I was at the University of Illinois, and I didn't do well on a test, and so I felt that it was a failure, and I went and talked to the professor about it, and he ended up making inappropriate advances toward me. I ended up reporting him, and that professor ultimately was fired. And so, although that to me was a failure having to go to him, ultimately it ended up being something worthwhile because I stood up and other women were protected as a result. So I think in the course of our lives, all of us have various failures, and it's what we do with them, how we use them to grow. I've run for office and I failed in that, but I'm trying again because I think that we learn from our experience.
Thank you. Jennifer Zordani.
I do think we learn from our experiences, but I still continue to fail at one thing repeatedly. And it's mincing my words sometimes. So in my career as a regulatory attorney, I've often been asked questions where people expect I'm going to be able to get to yes. but I'm a regulatory attorney. Sometimes the answer is just no. No, no, no. And I don't soft pedal that, and I don't sugarcoat it, and I don't delay the answer, and I don't spend a ton of time wasting people's time. So I probably will continue to be that way. And as my colleagues get to know me, they understand they're always going to get my time and attention when I know it's going to be well spent.
Sean Casten.
We may need more than a minute. I'll go with the recent one, and I wish I could tell you how to fix this one, but you get way too much credit as a CEO for having a fancy title, and in reality, you are only as good as the people working around you. And we built a company from an idea to 150 employees, $200 million worth of investment, 80 projects, and we tried to set up a structure where the people who had contributed could maximally benefit from the success. And along the way, we became dependent on the people who provided the money, who had more control. And at the end of the day, when we sold, the overwhelming majority of the gain went to the people who had contributed least to our success. And if I knew now what I knew then, maybe I would have negotiated a better set of documents for him.
Amanda Howland.
Well, I think that Carole said it succinctly. In terms of failures, it depends on how you let it define you. Does it make you stronger? Do you stand up and fight, or do you let it beat you down? And throughout life, all of us have had many failures, many ups and downs. I've had several that money to stay in school, considered that a failure, but found a way around it to continue on and to fight for the things that I thought were important. And also, like Carole, I've run for office and not won, but I know what that's like, and I know that I can win a second time. I know that I can win this time. So I haven't let it define me. I've stepped up, and I've made sure that I'm out there, and I'm fighting for all of the things that everyone here in this auditorium wants to fight for, because it's important.
Ryan Huffman.
So, on the campaign trail, I like to talk about my successes. I like to talk about my fancy degrees and my White House internship. But the truth is that my career has been one long failure. And I appreciate that you laughed at that, but the truth is, okay, I graduated in 2008, in the heart of the Great Recession. I had a journalism degree. Terrible idea. Terrible idea. I have $100,000 in student loan debt. All right? That's real. I'm not going to pay it off until the year 2045. I didn't actually get a job that had health insurance coverage for the first time until a month before I turned 30 years old. All right, so these are some real stats. I've applied to over 500 jobs in my life, and I take really good notes, so I know that's true. So, you know, and a lot of my friends and family, they've experienced the same thing in my generation. And if we say that, you know, this is what failure looks like, and Donald Trump is what success looks like, then maybe we need more failures in Washington.
Thank you. Becky Anderson-Wilkins, what's your position on issues related to women, including reproductive rights, equal pay, harassment in the workplace? And you all only get a minute on this one.
All right. So, yes, choice. Okay, we'll check that one off. When it comes to equal pay, absolutely. I've been in business with 3 brothers for many years, and believe me, I've fought for that equal pay. But yes, in the workplace, we need to pass the Equal Rights Amendment in this state. We should not be one of the only ones that hasn't passed it. So that is a must, absolute must. And as for sexual harassment in the workplace, we have had in our employee handbook for decades very strict rules about that, and we take it extremely seriously. And I think so many women in this country should be so proud for standing up. And we need to encourage everyone to stand up, because the more we stand up, the more we're going to fight it, and the sooner we're going to end it. And I think everyone should be conscious of it in all aspects of their life and their working life. So absolutely working against workplace sexual harassment.
Carole Cheney.
Equal pay, yes. And it's interesting, unions actually are a great equalizer for women, and that's one of the benefits of unions. And I don't know if many of you heard about the Janus opinion, but right now there really is an attack in the Supreme Court on collective bargaining and public sector unions and whether you have to pay for it. But on the broader issue of women, until women are in places of power, they're going to continue to be harassed. And so to me, this is a power issue. And it's not only for women, but it's for all people who aren't adequately represented in places of power, whether it's in Congress or whether it's in the corporate boardroom. It's interesting, I was preparing for a symposium and I watched the Anita Hill testimony again, and there was this diminutive African-American woman speaking about 30 years ago to a sea of white men. And then if you look at the vote on the ACA, I think that's why so many women were somewhat offended, because it was again a sea of white men voting. We need a system that more reflects the people.
Jennifer Zordani.
So I do believe that women are extremely competent and can make their own healthcare choices. So I think a woman's choice is between her doctor and her God. And I believe it was yesterday the Vice President said that he intended to see the end of legal abortion in his time. And if we see the end of legal abortion, we will absolutely see more abortions. So he is wrong. I also, of course, support the Equal Rights Amendment. I do support unions because they do help lift people up, and they do fight for equal wages, regardless of gender. And with respect to harassment in the workplace, our laws help protect workers against harassment. And we see in the corporate world less issues, still some, but less. And we see in places where there's less structure, more harassment, like Hollywood and politics.
Sean Casten.
So to make a totally dumb but honest point, I'm pretty sure women are humans. I think it's just human rights, right? Totally pro-choice, and I'm totally pro-choice for purely math reasons. The only way to lower abortions is making access to contraception. As Jennifer said, if you want dangerous abortions, ban them. You don't stop them. Yes, I'm anti-harassment. I'm in favor of equal pay. Again, I think this is one of these things where we talk about this too often in the framework of let's encourage diversity, which is terrific. What I wish we would talk about it more is saying the killer app that our country is that we're this place where people who are totally beat down in another place come here and feel relief, and oh my goodness, what a great place. In the workplace environment, if you just treat all people equally, people who've been treated horribly before say, this place is awesome, I want to work harder here, I like it better, and you get better performance out of everybody. Do it for totally selfish reasons. It makes for a wonderful environment.
Thank you. Amanda Howland.
Equal pay and equal rights, absolutely. I cannot understand why we have not had this bill passed everywhere. It makes no sense. As far as harassment is concerned, it's not gender specific and it's not race specific. It happens in the workplace regardless of your race or your gender, and we need to continue to enforce policies against that kind of harassment. I've been a subject of it, as others of us up here have been. As far as reproductive rights are concerned, I have always fought for a woman's right to choose, but I also think we need to fight for fair insurance coverage in terms of issues too. If we're going to give Viagra to men and count that as an insurance cost, what on earth are we doing on the other side? What do they think the outcome is going to be from that? Makes no sense. Reproductive rights and freedom to choose should be for all people, male or female, or transgender, or LGBTQ. It shouldn't matter. It's your body. You should be in control.
Ryan Huffman.
Well, I'm proudly pro-choice. I think we have got to protect a woman's right to choose. We've got to protect Planned Parenthood funding. Planned Parenthood is one of the only healthcare providers in many areas of this country, particularly rural areas. That's critical. I'm a passionate supporter of equal pay for equal work. It's absurd. I mean, I'm not a woman, but I'm furious about it too. Like, say, I know that's a surprise, but 72 cents on the dollar, 78 cents on the dollar, something like that. But it can't be that way. And we also need paid maternity leave. We are way behind the rest of the world in this. Way behind. It's embarrassing. And paternity leave too. To be honest with you, we've got to make steps forward in that direction. As for the harassment, we've got to make sure that the public figures who are coming to light, the allegations against them, they have to be held accountable. And we can't let it be, let's see which party they're a part of first before we decide whether they need to be punished. They need to be punished now. They shouldn't be allowed to use taxpayer money to have these hush settlements. And then finally, these other harassment situations that are going on behind closed doors, we'll hopefully start to see them subside too.
Kelly Mazeski.
I am proudly pro-choice. The government and our elected politicians have no business when it comes to the reproductive rights of women. It's a personal decision. And my policy, my position on this is one of the reasons I was able to earn the endorsement of Emily's list, which supports pro-choice Democratic women. When it comes to equal pay for equal work, absolutely this should happen. Peter Roskam voted twice against the Lilly Ledbetter Act, which was to provide women with equal pay for equal work. So it's unacceptable that he's a representative when it comes to this. Regarding sexual harassment, sexual assault, we need to be making a stronger stance on this in our society. We need to teach our young children that what is acceptable behavior when it comes to how to treat each other. We need as parents and as people in society to step up when we see abuse or sexual harassment happening. And men have to step up on this too. It's permeated into our society.
Thank you. Carole Cheney, what would you do to protect dreamers in our country, and how would you respond to pressure to remove family reunification policies for a merit-based system?
We need to be protecting the dreamers, and it's so unfortunate that they have become pawns in a political game. These people came to our country through no fault of their own, no choice of their own, and they have been contributors in every way, shape, and form, whether it's serving in the military or whether it has been students and productive members of our society. What's interesting is that Peter Roskam voted and does not support comprehensive immigration reform. We had an opportunity to achieve comprehensive immigration reform in this country a few years back. It passed the Senate. It went to the House. There were enough votes to pass it, and people throughout the 6th District were urging Peter Roskam to support it, and for him to urge the Speaker, John Boehner, to support it. He did nothing. John Boehner did not call it up for a vote, and it failed. It did not get called up for a vote. So we could have it today if it weren't for the actions of people like Peter Roskam, and that is what is so unfortunate right now.
Jennifer Zordani.
So I've been an advocate for comprehensive immigration reform and talked with people about that when I began running this race, even though demographically people might look at our district and not believe that we stand united on this topic. Peter Roskam is an outlier, out of touch, out of step on this. For the Dreamers, I think that's a little bit separate issue, and I think we could pass a Clean Dream Act immediately. And I think then we know we're going to have more tough decisions to make on comprehensive immigration reform, the rest of it. My grandfather, on my dad's side, grew up in a farming community in Kansas and could have been a coal miner or stayed in that community, and he came up to Chicago in this area. And he was a janitor. And I remember on Fridays, because they were Catholic, he made onion sandwiches, right? That's what it was, no meat Friday. So he made, and I was shocked, but he wouldn't be allowed in.
Thank you.
That's not right.
Sean Casten.
So in 2009, I was selected as an emerging leader by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and they gave us a 2-year project to write a report on the impact of comprehensive immigration reform in the city of Chicago. These were happier times when we thought that was going to be coming. I mention that because, number one, the Dreamers in DACA was seen at the time as being the really easy thing if we couldn't get anything else politically. And we don't really have a problem with the Dreamers right now. We have a problem with Donald Trump because we have basically a hostage situation where he took that off the table in order to try to get other things. And we will resolve that once we get enough leverage to force him to cave. But I don't think we should blame the victim in some of the way that we frame these negotiations of could the Democrats have gotten more. I don't You'd asked about family reunification versus a merit-based system. That is not the trade. Yes, we have to have family-based reunification. Yes, we have to have asylum protections. The merit-based system we should get to is to get away from the current national origin model, because the only thing we've been consistent about is which country we discriminate against. Let's get rid of that and move to merit and still keep these other humanitarian issues in there.
Amanda Howland.
When in Congress, I would immediately fight for a path to citizenship for our DACA students. I have many of them in my community college right now. They're productive citizens, they work hard, and they are working to make a better life for themselves and their families. The other thing I would work for is to make sure that we do not allow the legislature and Donald Trump to break up families and send some of the adults back to their countries while their children stay here. We are a nation of families and family-oriented, founded on immigrants. How on earth can we break up families and send parents back to another country? We do need strong immigration reform, and that's something that we're going to have to work on collaboratively. I'll tell you, having worked in federal court for many years as a law clerk, the best thing that I ever attended each time that it happened was the naturalization ceremony for the immigrants who have come to this country. It's so awe-inspiring to see all of the countries they come from and watch them take the oath. It actually brings people to tears. We need to do more for these people.
Ryan Huffman.
We all up here feel terrible about the position that we put the Dreamers in. We would all, I think, fight hard to try and get them a pathway to citizenship. But there was a moment back in January where the Democrats had a little bit of leverage because the Republicans couldn't keep their own government open. They couldn't get the votes to do that. And so we said, we're not going to give you the votes unless we have a deal on DACA. And we shut the government down. And then 3 days later, we caved. And we didn't get anything in return for that except a promise from Mitch McConnell and a lot of good that's going to do. And now, in a matter of weeks, we could start to see these Dreamers starting to be deported. I know we kicked the can down the road a little bit with the Supreme Court decision the other day, but that was our moment. That's when we had to stand up and fight for them, and we didn't. And we had an editorial board meeting back in January where they asked the 7 of us, would you have voted to keep the government shut down until there was a deal on DACA? And mine was the only hand that went in the air. I think that is, if we're not standing up for them, what are we standing for as a party?
Thank you. Kelly Mazeski.
When people come to this country and give up everything they know that's familiar to them, their families, their community, because they want a better life here and want to live the American dream, I think we should provide a path to citizenship for them. Absolutely, I support comprehensive immigration reform so our undocumented immigrants can come out of the shadows and fully participate in society. When it comes to the Dreamers, I thank God that the Supreme Court made the ruling they just made and that they can take a breath right now and not worry about being deported. We need to continue to work on this. I hope that Congress will take it seriously now that they have some time. I absolutely support extending it and allowing these Dreamers to find citizenship in this country. 80% of Americans support passing a DREAM Act. This should be happening. I think it's a moral issue in this country as well. When children come here with their families and have no say in the decisions being made, we cannot send them back.
Becky Anderson Wilkins.
I employ a dreamer in my business. And she is a remarkable young woman. She is the first in her family to go to college. And she is as American as my own 3 children. I can't imagine her going back to her country of origin. I cannot imagine that. And with her family, which are just an incredible group of people. She is on to a new career now, and how proud we are. But if you talk to her in our business, what a voracious reader. She told you to read something. You better read it because you'll love it. You'll absolutely love it. But when you think about the Dreamers in this country, 90%, over 90% of them are employed. They are contributing billions to our economy. Just from a simple economic standpoint, this is ridiculous to do this. And to use them as a bargaining chip is just absolutely, I cannot believe that we're doing this over a government shutdown, when that is the job of both the House and the Senate to keep our government running. But I've talked to many high school students, a lot of our local high schools, and a lot of them are Dreamers, and they're incredible kids.
So this question, we're going to start with Jennifer Zordani. Each of you hopes to and may deserve to win this primary, but 6 of you will not. How committed are each of you to vigorously promote the primary winner to help win the general election?
I absolutely work till November to flip our district blue. We have issues and people talk about things that aren't right and what goes on in our campaigns and what people are doing. And I think that voters recognize that we should all be on the same team. We should not be misleading our own voters. But at the end of the day, we're going to come together and we're going to work to flip this district blue. We've got a great slate of candidates, and I really implore you, because you are informed voters, and to talk to your neighbors and to get people on the right path in choosing a candidate who will be representative and honest and hardworking for the district. So I think we'll do a good job, and I'll support whoever wins the primary. I hope it's me.
Sean Casten.
So totally committed, and I think we think a lot about this issue as Democrats because we still have all this, are you a Hillary or a Bernie person in your head, and how well did that all work out? And you know, it's all top of mind. In this district, we all did a pretty good job, right? I mean, Hillary won here by 7, and whatever animosity there was going in, everybody rallied behind, and I have no reason to believe that won't happen again. But I would say for everybody in here, Hillary won by 7, but the rest of the ticket was a bloodbath for the Democratic Party. And so the challenge is not making sure that people who think like us and act like us all get out to vote and we rally. We will. The challenge is making sure that we reach across and make sure that those people who might have an R after their name but are disenchanted by the world that Trump has created believe in the message that we've got as well and want to rally around. Because that's what worked for Hillary, and that's what we got to do.
Amanda Howland.
Our goal here is to beat Peter Roskam and send him to his retirement. We do not want to do what happened with Hillary and Bernie, where we're polarized and divided. We cannot afford to do that. We have to keep our eye on the prize, and that is to beat Peter Roskam. We have an opportunity, and if there ever was an opportunity, this is the year. So we need to make sure that we unite and we get out and vote, and not only for this particular seat, but all the way down the ballot, because as Sean said, Hillary won by 7 percentage points. Bernie won this district by an even bigger margin. We should have had Democrats elected last cycle all the way down the ballot, those that were running for office, and we didn't because of the animosity. We can't afford that again.
Ryan Huffman.
Well, I think there's a realistic chance that we could have a 7-way tie, and then we're really going to get somewhere. Yeah, exactly. But no, this is a great question. It's come up before in forums, and I think we are all going to be completely united coming out of this primary. We are all in this race because we are just fed up with Peter Roskam, and we're fed up with Donald Trump. And so whatever quibbles, whatever differences we have on policy or on approach, at least speaking for myself, that's all going to go aside, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure we flip the seat blue. So I think that's what's going to happen. I think people are going to rally around it. But you know, this is the time that we have right now to talk about the issues that we have within our own party. We do have some issues that we have to work through. The primary season is the time for that. After it's done, let's come together and get Roskam out.
Kelly Mazeski.
Yes, I will support whoever wins this. I hope it's me, but of course I will stand and rally the surrogate for if anybody else should win this race. We have to stay united on this, that we have to keep our eye on the prize, and that is getting rid of Roskam. So I just really encourage us as Democrats to stay united and to connect with each other and keep everybody inspired to turn out to vote. And, you know, I'm saying everything everybody else has said, but we can't let differences or slight differences affect anyone after this primary. We need to stay together.
Becky Anderson Wilkins.
We gotta flip the 6th. And that's up to all of us to get the vote out at the primary and get us out in the general election. And we can't be that typical thing where we can't get the turnout in a midterm. So we are going to change that. And it's the resistance, the activism by all of us up here and all of you here that's going to make the difference. Because when we unite together, that's when things change. And we got to change this. We so have to change this. How many of you are tired of turning on the TV or listening to the news every day? But we are. We could be seven-headed, like Nidra, the three-headed monster, but we get a seven-headed representative. That would be the solution. But we need someone that listens, that engages, is not afraid to talk to somebody that doesn't have a different idea. And that's what we've been missing for years, because Peter Ross was too busy working to keep his job and not do it. So we need to support whoever wins this primary, because we need somebody that's going to do this job and listen to us and totally represent each and every one of us who lives in the 6th Congressional District.
Carole Cheney. I agree with what everyone else has said. We need to back whoever wins the primary. To me, this isn't just about defeating Peter Roskam. We're fighting for the very fabric of this country right now, and this seat is one of many throughout this nation that we need to take back. If we're going to take back the morality of this country, and if we're going to try and eliminate the bigotry that seems to have permeated since the election of Donald Trump, there has been an increase in bullying in our schools against children of various ethnicities since the election. There was a hate crime against a local delicatessen in Naperville. There have been swastikas in front of local religious institutions. That is why we need to come together after this primary and stand together. We also need to educate the voters. It's wonderful what the Coalition for a Better 6th and all the various groups have been doing in banding together to educate people and to get the vote out. We'll continue to work together for that.
Thank you. John Casten, what steps would you take to get money out of politics?
So let me start by making you all angry. Go home and Google HR 4916. It's a bill that Roskam introduced 2 weeks ago that would direct the IRS to reduce the disclosure requirements of people contributing to 501c organizations. That is what we should not do. So the depressing part first is that we're in a bad way with Citizens United, and I'm not sure whether it's quicker to pass a constitutional amendment or wait for a Supreme Court justice to die, but it's going to take one of those to get that done. In the closer term, let us stipulate for a moment that every single member of office is of pure heart and mind and uncorruptible. Okay, stop laughing. Assume that that's the case. Anything you do to reduce transparency in politics creates the impression it's not true. And if anybody running for office isn't willing to be completely transparent about where their money's coming from and let people look at their votes, you cheapen the entire discourse. So we got to do transparency for the first step.
Amanda Howland.
I agree. We have to make sure that we are completely transparent, that all of our elected officials have to be transparent. This bill that Peter Roskam just reintroduced is something he's been working on for a number of years. Last election cycle, he was trying to get a bill passed that would allow money to come from overseas back into the corporations of the United States and then be dispersed to PACs and to political groups. And that way, we wouldn't even know if foreign governments were investing in our elections, which they might be doing anyway now that we've seen what Russia's doing. So we need to work actively, loudly, strongly to reverse these campaign finance rules. It will take, because the Supreme Court is not going to die and we're not going to overturn it that way. It will take an act of Congress. We are going to have to look at a constitutional amendment, which is not easy. It's time consuming. But until then, we have to put as many restrictions on transparency, making sure people account for things as we possibly can in Congress. And you need to hold your legislators and elected officials accountable.
Thank
it's
you.
up to you.
Ryan Huffman.
As I mentioned before, this is the #1 issue for me. This is the biggest thing we've got to solve to get our country moving forward again. So I'm in favor of a public funding of elections. I think that's a system that we need to move towards. There's a great proposal that came out a couple weeks ago from Ro Khanna, a congressman in California, that would allow for basically that public funding of campaigns. And while it wouldn't prevent the big money in elections, And we can't do that until we overturn Citizens United. It will make you choose which pool you want to be able to pull money from, so that people who are pulling from the public pool have a good chance of winning as well. And then we've got to lead by example. It's really hard for us to make the case as Democrats. We say, yeah, the Republicans, they take all that money, and so do we, but maybe a little bit less, or maybe we take it from the right people. If it's corporate money, it's not good. We've got to be able to say, they do it, they take corporate money, we don't. We're funded by the grassroots. We got to lead by example. And so I pledge not to take any corporate money during this campaign or during my time in office. That's the kind of pledge that we need to see more. And we are starting to see more from our leaders.
Kelly Mazeski.
Of course, I would support overturning Citizens United, but we need to change the Supreme Court, and that's not going to happen for a while. But that's why we need a new Democratic president. And when it comes to funding from super PACs, the dark money that comes from them, we can, if we elect enough Democrats, we can require more transparency with this and make sure that we know and require that anybody who's giving be registered and that we know who they are. I think that's one of the biggest, most effective things that we can do in the near term. I would also like to see some kind of public financing for elections. We spend a crazy amount of time raising money because of Citizens United to win elections, because we have to compete with the Koch brothers and other super PAC organizations that are funding people like Peter Roscoe. So it's a very bad system right now, and I would do everything I can to try and change it.
Becky Anderson Wilkins.
Everyone should read Dark Money by Jane Mayer. Okay, I did a book plug. Okay. Read that book and you will be shocked and horrified to find out what's happening with dark money and how it ends up in our politics. I think everything I agree with here. I am not going to take a penny from a lobbyist, but I think what is campaign finance reform. You know, in Canada, you can't give more than $20,000 of your own money to your campaign. So when you think of our gubernatorial race and many other races in the state of Illinois right now, that's going to be the most expensive race in history. The gubernatorial race in history. We think about who's running for that race. This prevents those who maybe have great ideas, have great things to say, and are going to make a difference for us, don't have a chance. So in some countries like the UK, you're not allowed to do TV ads. The election process is much shorter. It may only be 3 months when you call up an election. There is so much that has to be changed, but the money has to get out of politics in so many different levels.
Thank you. Carole, Cheney.
Money in politics really is a threat to our democracy right now. And even if you look at the makeup of Congress itself, more than half of the members of Congress themselves are millionaires. And one of the reasons is just to be able to run. You know, it's a struggle for me. I can't put any of my own money into this race, and I work hard every day to raise money. So someone who is able to put in their own has a necessary advantage from the start. We need to get rid of that system. But when you look at it on the broader level, in the wake of Citizens United, we have seen an increase in income inequality in this country because the corporations are taking a larger and larger role in influencing the politicians to whom they contribute. And until we get the dark money, and yes, I read Dark Money, you want to curl up in a fetal position when you read that. But it's a threat to our democracy because it's a threat to really whether our vote truly matters in the eyes of politicians who are getting so much money from the super PACs.
Jennifer Zordani.
So I agree that we need campaign finance reform, and pushing for that is going to be difficult with Citizens United and the composition of our Supreme Court. But there are steps that we can do and we can take legislatively to increase transparency, to make super PACs and other corporate donors disclose who they're contributing to. I also think that what we're not recognizing is the nominating process. And one thing that is terrific about this race is that you have candidates from across the spectrum. So we have not had, obviously, a race where a single nominating committee or an establishment has landed you the candidate that they want to see in office. You have 7 people to choose from, which is an amazing choice here in this district. So this is democracy in action.
Thank you. Amanda Howland. What should the federal government do, if anything, to provide an equitable, quality public education for all children pre-K through grade 12?
First of all, the federal government should not be handing out underfunded or unfunded mandates to teachers. We need to keep our education system K through 12, or pre-K through 12 actually, local, because local control is the most important control. We know locally what we need, and each district is different than other districts. Having been an educator, I've seen so many unfunded mandates come through that we put an emphasis on having a well-educated populace. We are way behind other countries right now in terms of our education availability and in terms of our outcome. We need to make sure that we continue with Pell Grants and other grants that are going to help stave the cost off for students in post-secondary. We also need to reduce the cost of student loans. Right now they are absolutely usury. And I would work towards a system of free public education for secondary.
Ryan Huffman?
The goal has to be a world-class education for every American child. And we are nowhere near that right now. Equitability is a huge problem, right? If you grow up in Wilmette versus if you grew up on the south side of Chicago, the difference in your education is going to be staggering, and that's going to make a huge difference later in life. The data on this is very clear. The quality education you get at a young age has so much to do with your income later in life, your health outcomes later in life, your crime rate later in life. So we have to do everything we can to make sure we're leveling the playing field, and I think part of the issue we see is because the funding for our public schools is coming from property taxes. That also means that we tend to have really high property taxes unnecessarily. So if the federal government can step up, and I totally agree that local school boards should be controlling the education system, but the funding, we need much, much, much more funding from the federal government, and that's what I would work to do in Congress.
Mazeski.
Well, education is a big issue for me. I'm the first in my family to graduate from college, and I had student loans, and I was able to pay them back. And that should be available. Everybody should be able to obtain the education that best suits them. Every child should be able to live up to their full potential. So we need to invest in education, because investing in education is investing in the future of this country. So we need to provide universal pre-K, because those students earn higher incomes as adults. We need to fund the gaps for children in low-income areas so that they can still get a good primary and secondary education, and we have to make student loans more affordable. We have to, the average interest rate on a student loan is 6.8%. The average mortgage rate right now is 4.3%. That's crazy. Students should not be saddled with debt when they graduate from college. We need to promote apprenticeship programs with our unions, and we need to work with community colleges and high schools and local businesses to provide skills and jobs.
Becky Anderson Wilkins.
I just heard a statistic that preschool teachers will be some of the most important teachers in your child's life. We need to support that pre-K education. And as for secondary education, or even going into college, my mom was a teacher, and she was one of the first union members in District 203 in Naperville. And I used to go with her and help her grade papers, and I used to run the mimeograph machine. I can still remember that smell. But how important it was, and how she valued her job. We need to support teachers who pay them well. The other thing is, my youngest daughter just graduated from the University of Scotland, in Scotland, the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, this past June. Her college education at one of the top 3 colleges in the UK was cheaper than in-state U of I. How does that make sense? And then with Brexit, which is the same demographic that brought our president in the UK, made her education even lower because the pound went down, the value of the pound. So incredible education, that doesn't make sense. We need to make sure that college education, at least in the state, we can make it more affordable and accessible to more students.
Carole Cheney.
Well, this feeds again into the issue of income inequality, and those people who live in the more poverty-stricken areas are the ones who get the poor educations. When I was working as the Illinois chief for Congressman Foster, there was a community center in Joliet that we visited, and we worked closely with them. We actually got them a visit to the Michelle Obama's White House garden. But these children don't look outside of the 10-block radius in which they live. And so, yes, we need early education and preschool and fostering that. When you look to the higher education, yes, we need affordable student loans. But for some people, they don't even have the opportunity to get a loan. A Parent Plus loan requires a parent to co-sign. And if your parent has bad credit, it's a barrier to going to school. And that is where the disconnect is. It's societal issues that go beyond just the funding of education. Yes, we need to adequately fund it, and the stripping by Betsy DeVos to, away from the public schools, yes, that's a negative, but we need to look at it holistically too, because it's cultural as well.
Thank you. Jennifer Zordani.
So, like many of us up here, I was one of the first, I believe I was the first in my family to graduate college. I think my cousin was a little bit later than me, even though he's older than me. But I told you about my grandpa who ate the onion sandwiches. And why I say that is because he was so frugal, right? He and my grandma worked very hard to raise their two sons, send them to good schools, and my dad and my uncle had great educations. And they were able then to build successful lives. And then us kids got to go to college. And that is the American dream. So my grandpa was great at math and never ever had an opportunity to use that skill. But my dad did, and I do. And we have to fight for better education in America. Betsy DeVos is the absolute worst leader for public education in America. But we had problems before her, and we need to work harder at giving our teachers the resources they need.
Thank you. Sean Casten.
So I want to focus on pre-K to 12, which I think was what I heard the question. Number one, the public schools have to have maximum resources to do their job. And if people want to send their kids elsewhere, that's fine. That's their choice. Do not let them take their money with them, because all you do is suck resources out of the public school system, and the system becomes a downward death spiral. I saw it in my own high school growing up. So number one, get rid of vouchers. Don't let people take property tax, but if you want to do something else, that's fine. Number two, the testing system is so terrible. Any testing model that says that if you move from Englewood to Glenbard South, you suddenly become a better teacher is a terrible, terrible test. And so many of the tests functionally do that. And so testing to evaluate teachers, I think, is a terrible idea. The last thing, holy smokes, do we need pre-K education. I've got way too much personal education that's depressing and sad, but if you don't tell a kid by age 6 that he's loved and has potential, or she,
thank you.
It's so hard to make up that ground.
Thank you. All right, we've got 10 minutes left, so let's start with the closing statements. Kelly Mazeski.
Okay. It's just so encouraging to see everybody still here. I'm using up my time. I'm going to make it fast. We are at a critical point in politics right now with this election. This is not just about Donald Trump and Peter Roskam. It's about sending a message to our elected officials in Washington that need to actually show leadership and represent their own constituents. So when it comes time for you to vote, the one thing that all of us should be asking ourselves is this: who is going to stand up and fight for me and the families in our district? And I have been a longtime advocate and worker for climate change and protecting our environment, and because our families deserve clean air, clean water, and a healthy planet. And I believe that all of us should have quality health care. Oh my God, I used my time up. Anyway, thank you.
Ryan Huffman.
Well, yeah, thanks everyone for coming out tonight. This is really great to see such a good turnout for this. Listen, I know that I don't, in a lot of ways, fit the typical profile for a congressional candidate. The average incoming congressman is in their 50s, and I'm 31. The average incoming congressman has a net worth of $7 million. It's true. And my net worth is negative $100,000. So, yeah, I don't look like the typical congressional candidate, but maybe that's the problem. Maybe we don't have enough people like me in Washington, people who know how to solve problems other than just throwing money at them. people from the middle class, and people who are stubbornly going to try to fix the things that they see that are wrong in this country, and won't play the political games, and won't take the corporate money, and can actually make a big difference. That's what I'm going to try and do. Thanks.
Amanda Howland.
I ran for this seat last cycle in 2015, 2016 because I was asked to, and I knew at the time that I was not going to get help from the party. However, I did exceedingly well on a $130,000 budget, more than all of the others who ran prior to me, who had over $1 million each in their campaigns. Peter Roskin spent $30 million, I got 3 million, I'm sorry, I got 41% of the vote. I've been out there working for all of you for years. I'm a public servant and always have been. I'm not a politician. And I swear that I will go to Washington and support you and your values and your ideas and fight for health care and education and the environment and women's rights and equal pay and all of the things that are important to us as Democrats. I've been doing it for years. I've been out there walking the walk and talking the talk and working for other candidates and meeting you and greeting you and talking with you. And I hope that you will trust me to be your next congressperson because I will work for you.
Thank you. Sean Casten.
So let's understand the stakes. Donald Trump is a horrible, horrible person who scares the pants off all of us. He would not be nearly as dangerous without the silent acquiescence of Peter Roskin and his cohorts. And the culpability falls so much deeper on them than Trump in the final analysis. We know he can be beaten in this district. Hillary won by 7, showed how to do it. But as I mentioned earlier, it was a bloodbath down the ticket. Jeannie Ives won in this district by 20 points. Roskin won by 18. The median Republican lost by 10. So we need to look at this right now and say none of us on this stage is running only to be the Democratic nominee. If you cannot persuade at least 30 to 40,000 Republicans that they can trust the candidate up here with the economy and things that they historically don't trust us with, Roskin's in for at least another 2 years. Roskin's dream is to run against someone he can demonize as a crazy lefty. I am his nightmare. And I would like to have the good fortune to put him in a situation to take advantage of the social services he is currently doing.
Jennifer Zordani.
So as you've gotten to know me tonight, I hope that you recognize that my goal is to put you first, because Peter Roskin has not put you first, he has put you last. So as you get on the train tomorrow morning to go to work, or you sit in the car, I know what you're working for. I know what young people are going through to build successful lives and how difficult it is. I did go to University of Chicago and get a degree in economics, and I don't agree that trickle-down economics works for you. I've been a lawyer for a long time, and I know that the laws are supposed to protect you. They're supposed to protect investors and seniors and consumers. So I will put you first, and I reject this administration's attacks on hardworking Americans and its willingness to put government up for sale. We need a change, and I'd like to be that change and bring your voice to Washington.
Thank you. Carole Cheney.
We need a proven voice for people who don't have one. I left a corporate job to work in public service with Congressman Foster's office, and I understand both the district and the Washington component of it. And we talked a lot about the Washington issue component, but we haven't really talked about the district component. I've been endorsed by both the Chicago Tribune and the Daily Herald because they understand that I understand both components, the need to serve constituents and use that in developing your policy in DC, because you're not always going to be able to make the world of change on all of the major issues, but you can make the world of difference for an individual constituent if you listen. And it's both of those components that are so important in these days and times as we're standing up for the fabric of this country. I've also been endorsed by Congresswoman Robin Kelly, as well as Congressman Foster, with whom I worked very closely for a period of 4 years, but the most important endorsement is yours, and I respectfully ask for that at the polls. Thank you.
Becky Anderson Wilkins.
Okay, on those stories, so I'm going to tell you a little story, or a fast one, less than 2 minutes. This story starts in 1946, and a man who was a huge supporter of a New Deal because he saw what government could do for people in need, and he saw what government could serve and for the common good. But he and his business, he would talk about his politics and his business all the time, and he lost business over that. But during the Depression, his business barely survived. But his granddaughter in school was teased about his stand because it was a very Republican place at that time. So she was teased a lot about his Democratic stance on everything. Well, when he ran for Congress in 1946, he lost by a landslide. But at that point, he had garnered more votes for a Democrat at any time up until that point. And that district, and it was a lot of the 6th, but that district was completely shaped and went all the way down to Peoria. It was a much different geographic shape. But he was a man who cared for his community and served it in many ways, and he passed that down not only to his granddaughter, but to his grandchildren and his great-children, and that was my great-grandfather, Louis Oswald.
Thank you. So at the beginning of this, I'm not sure that I told you that I live in the 5th Congressional District. And I'm thrilled that I do live in the 5th Congressional District. We have an okay congressman, but even better is that we have 4 candidates running in the Democratic part of the 5th Congressional District. But you guys have a really, really, really hard choice between these lovely 7 individuals. So your participation as candidates and as voters is essential to preserving our freedom and our country. So please remember to vote on or before March 20th, and let's show these candidates good luck.